So let's talk about Patricia Wants to Cuddle. So to begin with, what is the origin story? How did this come about?
I mean, through brain rinsing, reality TV is also an outlet. So I watch a lot of like The Bachelor or Love Island. Recently, I'm into The Traitors. But yeah, I sort of grew obsessed with The Bachelor for a period of time in the mid to late 2010s. I was really interested in the performance of heterosexuality on The Bachelor, like how much work was going into everyone maintaining and upkeeping their appearance out of a suitcase while they traveled through the world. And at some point, I sort of realized, well, The Bachelor and a slasher movie have functionally the same structure. Like they're both elimination style contests where people get sent home or killed one by one until there's only a final girl remaining. Structurally, it's a perfect parallel. But beyond that, I think it sort of occurred to me that like people watch them for similar reasons. Like you're not watching The Bachelor because you want to watch the women hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Like you want to see people get sent home. You want to see tears. And so, yeah, I think there are a lot of reality show fans who are probably horror fans who don't even know it yet because they get the exact same catharsis out of watching this like fairly emotionally brutal competition that a lot of horror fans do out of watching people get physically maimed or murdered. And yeah, that was kind of the spark of it, was just realizing that structural similarity and deciding I should probably do something with that.
And so were you a big fan of reality TV before The Bachelor?
You know, I think The Bachelor was the gateway. Um, I was in a position where I had like rabbit ears on my TV. Like I'm a aging millennial, but I'm a young enough millennial that I've never had a cable subscription at any point in my life. And so when I had a TV at home that I played games on, I got like a $20 antenna at Target and it got ABC and ABC played The Bachelor. So yeah, I think I got pulled into it through that. I since I had a Survivor phase as well. I probably binged like 6 or so seasons of Survivor between projects at one point. But yeah, there was something uniquely transfixing about The Bachelor to me. I sort of explain it to people like it's like the converse of a drag show, you know? Like if people are going to drag shows to see queer people perform hyper femininity to a parodic extent, The Bachelor is almost straight women themselves performing hyper femininity to this comedic degree. Like there was something about what was in the water with the peak of The Bachelor's popularity and the like skyrocketing rise of Instagram that was a little harrowing, but also deeply fascinating to me, of people feeling like they needed to appear as put together and glamorous as if they were on television, just like in their daily lives, like to be able to take a selfie, you know? Like that was harrowing to me. I feel like we went from a period where people were allowed to have normal faces and normal volumes of hair to like very quickly this dystopia where it was like, no, your hair volume needs to be enhanced with extensions and your face needs to be contoured, like literally taking techniques from drag queens and making it sort of like a prerequisite to be perceived as as like a woman in public. It was like, oh, why are we just rapidly escalating the bar? I think we're seeing this now with like, not to get on too much of a tangent, but with like expectations for like cisgender men's like gendered performance and appearance, like in public and online. I'm like, okay, do we all have to become like anime character versions of ourselves in real life? Can't we just go back to the 90s? Like, weren't those body pressures bad enough when people could still kind of look normal but feel bad about it? Now we have to like, yeah. So that was what was sort of amazing and horrifying to me about The Bachelor all at once.
And how do you think that throughout the life of The Bachelor, it has evolved? Do you think that it has lent into being more honest as to what it is? Because, of course, to begin with, it would purport to be about finding love, but as highlight within Patricia Wants to Cuddle, it's not really about that at all. It's about fame. It's about getting rich. It's about validating yourself through the social media machine. And do you think real life reality TV is being more honest in terms of what it is?
I think we're at a point where the only successful reality TV format can be one that incorporates that meta aspect, or the fact that people want fame and money through them, into the show itself. That's why I have fun with something like The Traders right now, because it's just like, it's a game, or why I think Survivor has lasted for like 40 seasons, because it's just like, well, it's a sport. They all want the $1 million, like, um, but for the dating shows, they can have maybe a first couple of seasons where they've managed to rope on, some people who are like, maybe this will be an interesting way to meet somebody. Certainly, like, the social media machine wasn't what it was like today as like when The Bachelor premiered in, I think, 2003. But once it gets going and once it kind of develops its own steam, the allure of that is impossible to resist. And when you listen to contestants talk about their experience candidly, once all the paperwork and the NDAs have expired or whatever, most of them tend to be pretty honest that like what they wanted out of appearing on the show was a boost to social media following, or to be able to work with brands, or, to boost some other project or aspiration that they had. And I don't necessarily shame that. I mean, we're all kind of trying to do what we can with the ingredients we have available to us, but it does make watching it fascinating, because it has that, tell me if I'm pronouncing this right, that like kayfabe quality of professional wrestling, where everybody knows that it's orchestrated, but they can't say it out loud. Like, that would be the death of it. Like, that would instantly undermine it. So I find that tension very fascinating and interesting. Like, everyone kind of knowing what they want, but not being able to say it out loud. It's like the straight version of being in the closet. You can't
Right.
admit that you want Instagram followers.
Yeah. And for you personally and for society as a whole, what do you think are some of the joys and what do you think are some of the problems of reality TV?
I mean, it's a mirror. Like, it shows the best and the worst of us. Um, I think I alluded to one problem earlier, which is, I think reality TV is conscripting normal people to appear on television, but then those normal people are in turn like, getting all sorts of like cosmetic procedures to like look like Hollywood actors when they're just like dental hygienists from Minnesota. And I'm like, that to me, like, I'm sorry, but that feels evil, of like, we're all setting this like hyper exaggerated expectation for what our faces and physiques have to look like. I like, I'm too old to want to keep up with any of that. And I think it probably is doing bad things to the generation growing up, primarily seeing other human faces through screens and filters. Got to be inducing tremendous like body dysmorphia in people at increasingly younger ages. So yeah, I sort of place some of the blame for that squarely on like reality television. I do though think that like it has social value. Like, I think it provides a safe and digestible forum for people to talk about difficult social issues, because it's largely divorced from the realm of like politics, you know? So when there's like a scandal around the fact that like a show like The Bachelor, like historically did not cast very many contestants of color, like it, you know, I'm not saying it's worth it to create this discussion, but I'm saying the fact that it is a television show allows people to like talk about an issue like race, divorced from like, who are you going to vote for in November? It's like, what do you think about the cast of this show? Like, shouldn't it look more like the United States of America looks? And, you know, what's the downside of not having a wider swath of experiences on the show? And what does it mean when we do see diverse experiences on the show? Yeah, it's like a water cooler in a water cooler-less society, I suppose. Like, women especially, like, we love to just chat about like, what reality show are you watching, you know? And then you can be having a conversation about like, you know, like the representation of like deafness or disability because of like a reality show, you know, which is maybe not a conversation you would have just like unprompted. um, so yeah, I think it can do good things. I also think that, like, you know, the fact that it's a visual medium is probably not great for us. We should have reality show radio plays. Those would be super popular, I bet.
Do you feel that, looking at it from a negative aspect, that reality TV, reality shows is putting celebrity worship into a realm of the unrealistic? To me, I feel like that we're just a few steps removed from Antiviral, Brandon Cronenberg's movie, where it's like, they don't want to look like them, they want to be sick like them, or they want to. So that's, to me, I see that that's a danger. Do you think that we are getting to the point where it can go too far?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's this like playful phrase of like main character syndrome that I think is very synonymous with like a reality TV era. Like, everyone is like, I am a hero, I have a story, and
Mm-hmm.
that story like should be nationally broadcast to everyone, or broadcast from my phone to everyone on the planet. And I'm not saying people aren't meaningful and people don't have stories that they need to share. I mean, you know, I write memoir. I would be a tremendous hypocrite to say people shouldn't do that. But I think that like, we need to eventually arrive at the humility of accepting that like, we are in this big herd of a billion, six, how many billion people on the planet now? It's not six, it was six when I was growing up, right? It's probably
I,
like 8 or 9 now.
I think it's closer to 9 now.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, it's easier to do as you get older, especially. But I do kind of worry that reality shows and social media in conjunction are kind of training us all to see ourselves as protagonists. Um, and as I get older, I'm more like, I don't want to write any more memoir. And my writing grows increasingly weird, and it becomes about alienation or anonymity, because I think, like, that's the wake up call that I think a lot of people raised only in that era are going to have. Like, I remember a time before it, and I remember a time after it. And in my late 30s, I'm probably like the last generation that still has that experience of, like, I remember before we were carrying computers in our pockets, and I remember now when I have a computer in my pocket at all times. Yeah, I think that, like, not to get too grandma about it, but when you see the poll that's like, some astronomical percentage of Generation Alpha, like, wants to be a YouTuber when they grow up or something, I'm like, ooh, that's scary to me. Who's gonna watch your life if everyone else is broadcasting theirs? I think there will be, a bit of like an awakening there as the ravages of time catch up with us all, where you're like, well, shoot, it turned out like I wasn't the main character of reality after all. I am just another, semi-successful novelist living in a condo eating frozen pizza, like, there you go. Like, that's how it shook out.
I think that I think it's natural to feel that we are the heroes of our own story. I mean, and we should, to some degree, feel that way, because we're authentic. It's a way to be authentic, and it's a way to present ourselves positively. Whereas, I don't think that anyone's woken, and there's probably somebody in the world when I says this, it's like, oh, well, it's me, who thinks they're the villain of the entire world. And to me, that's an extreme, but we want to feel good about ourselves. And so I don't get into reality TV, but I understand why people do. It's because they, like you said, it's a mirror. They see their selves in that, and they see a way that they could better themselves. And I'm all for that. It just, to me, it's scary, especially when it comes to a worship type thing. And then you have people saying, when I grow up, I want to be a YouTuber. It's like, no, you're going to work at McDonald's, so there's like reality is going to slap them upside the face.
Yeah. Or maybe you could figure out how to be a poet instead of like being a YouTuber,
Right,
like maybe
exactly.
You could make something else out of the experiences. I mean, like, to me, that's one of the most fascinating contrasts here is, like, I think you're absolutely right. Like, social media is about image brandishing. Like, I have to participate in it myself when I'm marketing a book, right? Like, you have to be like, here I am good at this. I look semi-acceptable. Look at me. I'm the author of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul, whatever. But what is fascinating and rewarding about fiction is you can be honest about yourself. Like, you can say, like, the dark truths that you really think, because they're veiled through the prism of narrative. Like, and I think that's healthy for us. I think that's good for us to be like, that's why horror is so important. It's like, here's all the weird antisocial messed up impulses I have like splattered on the screen, and it looks terrible. It's like the opposite impulse of, like, look at me, don't I look so good, aren't I so perfect? This was not a notable person who said this, but it was like some like comedian or celebrity on some podcast I heard 10 years ago, but it made a huge impression on me. They were casually like, whenever someone starts describing themselves with too much confidence, like, they're almost always lying. Like, whenever someone's like, I'm just a really chill kind of person. Like, I just like to go with the flow. Like when you hear that from someone, oftentimes it's like, well, you want me to think that about you. It's probably not close to the reality of you. And social media and especially and like the confessional forms of reality TV are just endless prompts for us to talk about ourselves. And so of course we're going to be as flattering to ourselves as possible in those contexts. But when you write fiction, you can be unflattering. You can be like, I actually like sometimes feel like I want to strangle somebody, you know, like like you can tell on yourself. And that's what's titillating and exciting about it. Yeah, I wish they wanted to grow up and be horror novelists or horror comedy novelists instead of, you know, pulling pranks on people and filming them and posting them on TikTok.
What is your relationship with social media like, both as a consumer and a creator?
I mean, you know, it has its dopamine hooks in me as it does in many people, but I feel like annoyed by it when you catch yourself scrolling through like an Instagram reel and you're like, wait, did a half an hour just like elapse? And I was looking at these things that are explicitly like gamified and like designed to make me like mad enough that I'll like open the comments section to engage with it, to boost it in the algorithm. You know, I'm like, this is terrible. So when I catch myself, I like stop and put it down. And I don't post really very much at all anymore. Like my relationship to that has changed entirely. You know, I'll post notable life events. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It goes into the cosmic alienating next book I'm writing. Increasingly, I feel an instinct to withdraw that I didn't know was possible. But apparently you can, because, you know, at a certain age, you just start getting more and more invisible to the world. And that is simultaneously sad, but it's also kind of exhilarating to not care anymore, you know? Like when someone tells me about something that people are talking about on TikTok, which I don't have on my phone, I've never signed up for TikTok. That's kind of my like red line. I'm like, wow, like how amazing it is that I never have to know any of that. That's beautiful. And I crave more of that feeling as I get older.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, particularly with the tumultuous time with social media right now, really since Elon Musk bought Twitter and rebranded it as X, I think there's some uncertainty in terms of what will be the prevalent social media platform. And I mean, as things are getting more and more consuming, more and more personal, particularly with platforms such as TikTok, I'm wondering if we're going to see a kind of reversal in a few years. So rather than people looking for their 5 minutes of fame, they'll be looking for their 5 minutes of privacy.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's this like interesting trajectory where like social media, there was this almost like brief flash in the pan window where like people built genuine human connections through it. But then, you know, as like venture capital gets a hold of that, you know, and it's like, well, actually, I'll make your timeline non chronological because we've determined that that means you spend more time on our website, which means we serve you more ads. Or, you know, like, actually, we found that you spend more time on our social media site when you're angry. So we're going to serve you content from political pundits that we know don't align with your viewpoints, right? Like it becomes unusable for that purpose, right? But like there are people who like met each other on Tumblr or Reddit or even Twitter and like got married, you know, like there was this weird window where that was possible. That you're right. I do feel like we are sort of lurching towards some kind of post social media age. And I mean, I think part of what's happened is like the platforms have been taken over by people who basically really only want asymmetric engagement. Like everybody is just broadcasting to an imagined audience of a gazillion people instead of like talking to each other. And that's not like tenable as a platform, you know, like ideally you are trying to recreate the conditions of a public piazza in you know, Rome. Um, and I don't think you can do that in a monetizable, sustainable, scalable way. Which I think has become clear again and again with the failure of each successive platform. And so, yeah, I do kind of wonder what's going to happen or what'll fill the vacuum. And maybe it's good for us to have a vacuum again. Like, my God, wouldn't it be nice to like end your day and be like, I wonder what other people on the planet think about this movie that I saw, and to just sit with that unknowingness instead of being able to immediately scroll through, 1,000 reactions to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was excitement as well when you met up with a friend to discuss a movie or a book that you'd recently read or watched, and yeah, you had no idea what the other opinion was on it. But now, because you've almost got this general consensus or this availability of opinions, it might even be removing some of the joy from, you know, actual human interaction in person. So there's quite a danger of that too. And I think, you know, that there's more people who are becoming socially isolated because there is that kind of faux function of socialization through the computer, but I don't think, you know, it might replicate, but it doesn't make up for it, or it's not a real substitute for actual human connection.
Yeah, I mean it's carbohydrates when you need like a steak, you know. Like for me, what I find when I do like withdraw from the online world is that it makes the moments of human connection feel more meaningful. I'm not an especially extroverted person, but it doesn't take a lot of looking at my phone in a day for me to be like, I don't want to see someone today. That seems exhausting. I've already like seen what people from you know, Indonesia to Los Angeles have to say about Dune 2. Like, why do I need to go hang out with my friend and talk about Dune 2? You know? Yeah, you can fill up really fast on bread, you know, like on your phone. And I'm trying to be better about, not just inhaling the whole breadbasket and spoiling my dinner.
Yeah, it's like it's like the capitalization of the words and the font change. It used to be social media, and now it's social media. And it's all about this for the exact same reasons that you mentioned with, you know, the venture capitalist and all that. And we need to get it back to social. You know, maybe change it to social interaction.
Yeah, I mean, the internet itself is becoming like unusable with like Google search declining in quality and like AI generated content like flooding the internet. And then AI will eventually probably start generating content off of AI generated content. And like it will all just be like, you know, we're talking like Tower of Babel level stuff for like our world's like free global information resource. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The only value I get out of typing anything into my computer these days, it feels like, is adding Reddit to the end of any search string I do. Because I'm like, at least for now, that still directs me toward like real people who have actually typed something, who've thought about, something and put it online. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. And Patricia, of course, like, it grapples with social media in the social media age in those ways. The horror in Patricia isn't just a Sasquatch is maybe going to kill you if you wander too far in the woods. It's like, we're in this system. Our faces and our lives and our identities and our relationships are all like mediated through Silicon Valley.
Now, talking of Sasquatches, you said before that originally there was not going to be a Sasquatch in Patricia Wants to Cuddle. So I want to know, when did that element come into play? And then also to go further back, I mean, when did you first hear about the Sasquatch? And tell us a little bit about that interest, because I know it goes pretty deep, because you've got a podcast, Beasts of Seattle, in which you really go into Sasquatches and Bigfoot.
Yeah, I would say I started getting into it more in an amateurish sort of way when I moved to the Pacific Northwest in 2018. You're surrounded by it here in Seattle. Like, Sasquatch is everywhere. There's Sasquatch coffee spots and Sasquatch t-shirts and Sasquatch bumper stickers everywhere. It's our local tradition to like believe in this hairy ape creature in the woods. I think it's like a fun, ironic, jesting belief for most people, but you will occasionally like talk to people, as I did for that podcast, who have had what they feel are genuine sightings or experiences or brushes in the woods. And when you spend time out here among these big fir trees, it's very easy to imagine something like that. You have these vast expanses of forest land. It's nice to think that there might be something out there we haven't discovered or experienced yet. So yeah, I mean, originally I was thinking that the troublemaker in the slasher reality TV concept novel I had would be some past or current contestant, or maybe a former lead or something. And I think I needed the book to have more of a kind of a figurative or a metaphorical punch. And Patricia, the Sasquatch, kind of ended up serving that function. Because, to tie into like what we were speaking about earlier, like a Sasquatch, like a female Sasquatch is sort of everything like a 22-year-old appearing on The Bachelor is terrified of looking like, big, unwieldy, hairy, ugly by human standards, right? So I loved that juxtaposition of like, you are Dyson air wrapping your hair to perfection and, doing like makeup worthy of a news anchor like every morning. And you are terrified of this creature that sort of represents like your worst fears of how you might be perceived one day.
And throughout the book, I mean, it is an examination as to what is and isn't a monster, and how we have misconceptions. And I mean, how does one even go about defining a monster in the first place?
I find the history of like queerness and monsters deeply fascinating. It's interlinked from the very foundations of horror, from like Mary Shelley's like Frankenstein on, um, you know, like often in pre-Hays Code horror movies, especially, like the monster is the vehicle for expressing or displaying queerness. And sometimes that can be done in a moralistic or condemnatory way. That's the history of like much horror is, oh, the queer monster is punished. Like the monster defies or threatens the human order, and at the end we destroy it. But I think for that reason, like queer audiences who have long gravitated to horror as a genre have like typically identified or sympathized with the monster. And so I think more recently, as you're seeing more LGBTQ creators kind of being able to take the reins and make horror ourselves instead of just being like avid consumers who recontextualize it in our minds, like we're getting to create stories where the monsters are more complicated and they represent queerness, but they are maybe not punished, or maybe humans come to sympathize with or understand the monsters. You know, like I think you can see it even in something like, I would mark something like The Shape of Water as like a real uh, public mainstream example of that turn from, oh, we're not going to like kill the monster. We're going to actually like love the monster because it's persecuted, and like root for a future in which the fishman wins, you know? Um, and yeah, Patricia is sort of like participating in that tradition of, you know, queer reclamation of the monster, of saying, hey, maybe the monster, maybe the monster was right. Or maybe there's something about Dracula's way of living in the world that actually makes more sense than like, you know, being mortal. Like it's about giving in to like what I think, you know, was often sometimes presented to audiences as like, look how horrific this excess of desire, or this like, you know, horrific appearance, or this differently gendered creature, like to kind of take those and cherish them instead of rejecting them.
Yeah, I felt that reading it then, and I have to admit, this is not a book that I would have sought out to read. But Michael suggested it to me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it because there's so many layers, and I feel that exactly what you were talking about is wormed its way through the entire narrative, and in so many different ways. I love how it basically skewers celebrity, you know, celebrities, celebrityism, that kind of worship. But at the same time, you actually kind of care for these people in a way. And you start to, you know, have a feeling each character has their own distinct voice, which I loved. They had their own distinct personalities, and there was increasing levels of the good old ultraviolence occasionally, and I was like, oh yes, yes. And so but it's not that's not even on the surface. There's layers there, and so it was very, very brilliant. You've got a fan in me, I promise you that, because like I said, this is if I'd have seen that book at a bookstore, I would have been, oh, I'm in the wrong section because it's romance. I typically don't read that. I read horror, read thrillers, I read crime. I recently got into espionage, which is weird, but anyway, you know. But also reading, I occasionally do read YA, but I tend to not read romance because it's not a genre that I've ever really interacted with. And so you kind of brought me into, and it kind of opened up the door there. I was like, I might need to check out more of this, especially if there's got some of that good old ultra violence in it. So that was pretty damn cool. But there's
I mean,
it's very nuanced and layered, and I like that. It's brilliant.
I'm glad it found its way to you, because like I love being able to blend genre like that. Like I was very nervous about writing it because, like I knew, for one, like I wanted it to reach readers like you, like horror thriller readers. But I knew that because of like the reality show element and the love letters and things like that, it might like need a little bit of pushing to get into like your hands. And at the same time, the readers who would naturally gravitate toward it, I was worried they would get to like dismemberment and be like, what am I doing here? But to me, that's what was always compelling about being able to write it, is like, for one, I love gore. Like I love 80s slashers with practical effects where you see people's heads and arms and stuff get chopped off. Like I love before the MPAA like cracked down on it, but it also, like, it wasn't just gore for the sake of gore. Just like I think, gore in 80s horror movies is more complicated than people give it credit for. Like it was serving a function as well. Like people get torn apart physically the way that we tear apart like the people that we watch on our screens, so like the violence is in the service of something, and
It's
so for
earned.
me, yeah, I had to have it. And like there were a few moments where I was like, should I do the PG-13 version of this? Should I like just have someone get their head knocked against a rock and we fade to black? And to me, like, it wouldn't be the same book or have the same message or the same power if it didn't kind of go there.
Yeah, and I call that's fearless writing. That's if you can get into that where you're not afraid to put it on the page or afraid of how people are going to react to it. That to me is that's cutting edge. That's where it needs to be, instead of being, some generic stuff that you won't remember in 2 weeks. This book is going to stick with me for forever, because it was like, shit, this is actually pretty good. It's like, it's a lot. When I started reading it, I can tell when something's good usually within like the first couple pages, and so I was like, oh well, this is going to be really good. This is going to be really good. And then it got some of the violence and the gore, and I was like, oh yeah, and there's a mystery in there and all that. And then you're skewering people that I consider flaky, so I'm like, yeah, I like this. This is killer. It's excellent.
I
I'm
love
sorry.
that fearless writing. Sorry, I'm excited. That's gonna live with me. Fearless writing. I won't say I felt fearless. I felt very fearful doing it, but I do think I was at that place of like, screw it. Like I've gotta be me, and I've gotta like do what feels right. And there is a chance this could land with a reader and people would be like, what is this? And I sort of had to take that risk. I mean, I think you see that, like, I think even now it struggles from being like cross genre in the way that it is, because like I think you are trained to like the violence and the structure of how that works, of like, oh, the people die and then like the book is over. Like that's the point, is like we're here to build up to these big moments of brutal gore. And then I think for readers who were coming to it kind of saying, okay, I'll put up with the violent elements to get to the satire that I like. A lot of those readers I noticed came away being like, I wanted another 100 pages to like find out how everything went down on the island. And to me, that's anathema to like my horror storytelling instincts. I'm like, no, after the people die, you go home. Like, you know,
Yeah.
we don't stick around on the Wicker Man Island for 30 minutes and like watch them clean up the ashes, you know? Like, he's going up in flames. There you go.
Yeah, that would probably be very boring and cold, and it's like just like a whole work crew come out and just clean up the Wicker Man, and they linger on that as the credits roll. Like, nah,
Yeah.
get out of there, it's over. Yeah,
Yeah. And, you know, I, I think I have had to, since it came out, just live with knowing that, like, because it is so, like, so straddling genres that, like, sometimes it will land with the perfect reader and sometimes it will land with the reader who's like, I liked it except for the gore, you know? Uh, which, yeah, you know. But, like, you know, I even talked about that with people like my agent or my editor going in. It's like we kind of knew this wasn't for everyone, obviously, given the premise. But based on early readers or early reactions, we got the sense that for people who it really clicked with, it would like really click. Like they would be thinking about this book in 10 years. And to
yes,
me, like I would rather write kind of a flawed book you're still thinking about in 10 years than a really smoothed out book that like you forget in two.
right. Well, yeah, you did that, and yeah, because it's kind of unforgettable, and I'm really looking forward to reading the next one and the one after that. So yes.
I would love that. I'll send you a galley as well. I'm nervous about the next one too. A lot of fearful, fearless writing happening once again.
Yeah, I feel that for any project there is a sense of trepidation when putting it out in the world, when sending it to first readers. It just seems to be the natural way of things because, I mean, how can we possibly know how anything is going to be received? And I think also, as the writers, we're too close to the project. So, actually, an amount of fearfulness in kind of anxious anticipation is healthy, is normal. Because we don't want to
Yeah.
be consumed by it. That's the thing.
I mean, the terrifying thing about building something like a book is it's so large that it like surpasses your brain's ability to hold it all at once. Like you have to be able to off-source it onto these pages where it then like lives and becomes its own organism. And when you can't kind of hold it all in your brain at once, like an index card or something like that, um, there's something, I don't know, ungainly about it, you know? Like, I don't know how you both feel about like the editing process, but like, you could edit something forever and never iron out all of your quirks or inconsistencies or, you know, or
Mhm.
crutches. Like, so you're just kind of like chipping away at polishing this thing until it gets to some state that like you think clears some threshold. And so much of that is like a gradient and not a binary that the whole process becomes terrifying. You're just like, well, I have looked at this set of 300 pages over and over again for a year. And I guess I need other people to look at it now because I can't look at it anymore.
Yeah, I think we have to send it into the world or send it to our agent or editor in spite of the fear. The fear will always be there, but you just have to take that jump and see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, oof. I guess I hoped that it would be less scary by book 3, but yeah, each time, I don't know, you get your memory wiped or something, and like each time you look at it in a Word document or Scrivener or whatever you use, and you're like, gosh, I can't think about all this at once. I can't cross check what's on page 180 with what's on page 18. This thing is too big. It reminds me of like being in calculus in high school and like reaching the point in the coursework where you're like, I'm not sure I really fully understand what's going on anymore, but I have to keep trying to like get good grades on the homework, yeah, book writing feels like that. If I could write things that were only a page, I feel like, or maybe that's misleading too, but I tell myself that, yeah, if I only wrote something very short, I could make sure it was perfect. But short story writers probably don't feel like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And I mean, we were saying how, I mean, rather than saying this is cross genre, I would go further and say this defies genre. This refuses to be put in any sort of genre box. And of course, you and your agent were very much aware of that. So I'm wondering, how did you land your agent to begin with? And then, given how genre defying this is, how did it end up being published by Zando?
Yeah. I mean, my agent found me through my online journalism. I was a senior reporter for the Daily Beast, a large New York based digital news publication, for a number of years. In the 2010s, I was largely reporting on LGBTQ issues, first under Obama and then under the Trump administration. And my agent found me through that writing. And so, the natural fit was to do, queer autobiographical and nonfiction writing. So Real Queer America, my first book was a memoir travelogue taking a road trip through conservative parts of the United States, meeting and interviewing LGBTQ people. Um, and so like there was kind of a natural outgrowth. That's the trajectory for a lot of journalists is, the agent scouts you or you reach out to the agent, but one way or another, you do a first book that's really directly related to your journalistic work. But I had the idea for Patricia before that. Like, it was sitting in a Google document, but I thought it was too like outlandish and not at all related to what I was doing. So that would be a tough sell for publishers. Real Queer America went to Little Brown at Hachette, so like a large traditional publisher, and Patricia was, I mean, I'll be candid, like a real journey. There was a big chunk of several months when I was pretty convinced it wouldn't sell at all. And I was just kind of SOL with it, like we went down the list, big and minor, and we got a lot of polite rejections of like, it's so interesting, but it's not for me, or like, it's interesting, but this, or, I don't think that this quite works, or blah, blah, blah. It is a strange book to think about housing, like where do you shelve this? And for that reason, I think like it's kind of a daunting sell, like we pitched to a lot of the like thriller imprints of larger publishing houses, but they're not looking for like Sasquatch reality TV satire thriller. They're looking for like solving a murder at a beach house. Like thriller, you know? So, yeah, like I was in the wilderness with it, and I was like, if someone wants to give me $2, I'll sell it to them. Like it got pretty grim. And then yeah, Zando, a young editor at Zando came along, Serena Kamath, and this was her first book she had ever acquired for any publisher she ever worked at. And she was one of those people who immediately got it and saw like the vision the entire way through. Also a Bachelor fan. And like without her, I think that I genuinely believe this would like still be on my Google Drive.
Well, thank goodness for Serena then, because I am so glad that this is out in the world. And I mean, actually, an element that we have barely mentioned is the storyline between Kathy and Maggie and the love letters. So I'm wondering, I mean, when, in terms of the process of writing Patricia, did this come along? And also, I'm wondering how much of you personally went into this storyline.
Yeah, I would say a lot of like my relationships are in those love letters, partnerships, friendships, etc. Um, but the interstitial elements. So Patricia, you know, it follows a group of four reality show contestants in the final weeks of a Bachelor style dating show. They're filming on a remote Pacific Northwest island, and there's a shadowy creature looking in the woods, like very on its face, a very traditional horror premise. But the interstitial segments between the chapters are at first Reddit style forum posts about the show, then kind of blog posts from someone who came to the island in the mid 2000s, investigating her sister's disappearance on the island, and then eventually love letters written in the 70s between two longtime residents of this island. The interstitials began with the Reddit posts as this almost like it's like a Greek chorus function, you know, like you get to have a little bit of action and then you get to have the snarky little parrots like talk about it for a second. And the letters entered because I felt like I wanted to really draw out some of the more emotional themes of connection, alienation, finding kinship among fellow outsiders. So that's where the love letters stemmed from. But I also wanted this effect of getting to the end of the book and having these bursts of like incredibly pure and sincere communication. Because you start out in the world of social media, reality shows, everything is fake, everything everyone is telling to each other is a lie. And as, you know, the heads roll and people come to more profound realizations about themselves and about their own mortality, I felt it was super effective, or I hoped it would be, to have these little bursts of like, to me, like the most pure bottled up essence in the world, which is like, you know, young people and like love, like telling each other how much they love each other.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, transmitting it in this epistolary format just added another dimension, another really effective layer to the storytelling. Did you always know that it would be experimental in its presentation? And do you think going forward you will be writing more stories in a epistolary or experimental format in terms of the media and the method in which the story is told.
Yeah, the progression of it was the Reddit posts. Remembering it now, the Reddit post began because I wanted to find a way to get the clumsy world building and exposition out of the narrative. I wanted the sections with the women on the island to be as propulsive and as seamless as possible. I didn't want to have to tell you what their ages, occupations, and backgrounds were. I mean, there are ways to do that in prose that are elegant. Maybe if I were a better writer, I would have found them. But to me, like, what appealed was, well, especially because I had to make up this whole show, even though it's modeled after other reality shows. Like, it had to have its own host, its own history, its own set of rules. But yeah, the interstitials began as a way of like, let me get all that out of the action chapters. So we have action and then we have exposition, but the reader, well, if you're a writer reading it, you know what's going on. But if you're just a reader, it's like you're getting exposition, but you don't know you're getting exposition. You feel like you're just reading a website, but in fact, I'm telling you how long the show has been on the air, what episode we're at, telling you some of what happened before this episode began filming, etc. And so, yeah, that kind of opened the door for me to experiment with putting other sorts of things between the chapters. The middle interstitials are sort of experimenting with like very like true crime kind of voice of like, I'm here on this island to like unravel this conspiracy and I'm going to uncover a little piece that leads me to the next piece. In terms of going forward though, Roland Rogers, I wrote it in a mixed media way, and Serena, bless her, was like, I liked that for Patricia, but I don't think that actually serves this story. And I say bless her because she was 100% right, even though it required me to like effectively rewrite the entire book. But after this, I think I'm done with like a traditional novel format. I think like the next one will be almost entirely epistolary. At least that's how I've started it.
Yeah, and I think the way that Serena has been as an editor is exactly what you want. You want somebody who loves your work and is going to advocate for you, but also who's going to be brutally honest when required.
It is terrible, though. Wouldn't it be great if you could just write it perfect the first time? But no, like it is the worst when an editor is right. And editors are usually right, I've found. I think near the start of my career, I used to be kind of more precious about keeping my darlings and things like that. And with Patricia on the first pass, I literally highlighted, I read through it to see what Serena had done in places, but I literally just highlighted it and clicked accept changes and then worked from that draft because I was like, let me have trust in the person who read it and experienced it for the first time in a context outside of my own mind. Like 9 times out of 10, that's always going to be a safer bet than your own instinct. Once you kind of get it across that finish line, you need to, it's like such whiplash though, because while writing it, you kind of need to believe like, I'm the best. I'm so awesome. This has to be told. Only I can do it. And then you hand it in and you have to immediately be like, I am a moron. Like I must like absolutely like accept what other people say about it now.
I love that faith and that trust that you put in Serena to just hit the accept all button. I always meticulously go through every suggested change and, accept manually if I agree. But yeah, I feel there should be some sort of meme where it's like, find me someone who will trust me the same way that Samantha trusts Serena, because that is incredible right there.
Absolutely. And I do want to mention Serena acquired Roland, but then went to another publisher. So I had another fantastic editor for the rest of Roland named Kaylin Douglas, who was also like really great with it and kind of like pushed me in directions that were good for me, even if it felt like eating my vegetables sometimes, like I think that's so healthy. And like, I think, especially when you're writing something kind of risky and cross genre or genre defying, you do kind of need to like sometimes rely on an editor as an anchor. Like, is this still working? Is the blend still right? Do I need to turn up the, turn this element down or this element up?
Yeah, and I understand too that the rights for Patricia have been bought in terms of TV rights. Do you have any television show news that you can share with us?
All I know is what the production company has told me, which is things are in the works. I've seen, pitch pages and sketches of how things would look, and mood boards and all sorts of materials that in the mysterious world of Hollywood are indicative of it moving along. But I don't have a concrete update to share just yet, but I'm very excited at the possibility of having one.
All right. And I must ask as well, how did the Lilly Wachowski blurb come about?
I mean, speaking of a time when social media could be social, I knew Lilly through Twitter. One of my most prized possessions is a small prop from the movie Bound that Lilly was kind enough to send me. Have either of you seen Bound before? There's a plane ticket in someone's pocket when a character gets shot, and it like creates a perfect circle through the plane ticket, and it's surrounded in blood. And I have that plane ticket in a shadow box, and I will keep it forever.
That is incredible.
Very cool.
So, are you currently in contact with Lily? Was a friendship formed from from this? I mean, she sent you the plane ticket from Bound. That's some serious stuff going on right there.
We have each other's numbers. I would say contact is very intermittent. I don't want to be one of those people who's like, oh my God, you made the Matrix, blah, blah, blah. So it will be like, once a year, I'll be like, blah, blah, blah. Or in the case of the Bound ticket, it was like Lily just randomly being like, what is your address? Have something to send you. She's very she's a woman of few words, I would say. The blurbs come about by carrier pigeon almost. I'll send her a book that I'm working on, and then you'll get the most beautiful gift in your inbox on the day you're least expecting it, which is one of the creators of the Matrix, like saying that you have a wacky, interesting brain. That I'll dine out on that in my 80s.
Oh, yeah.
If people remember what the Matrix is, then I wonder, will we have remade the Matrix by then? I hope that they've like locked it down in some way.
I feel that even if we live in a universe where it has been remade, that it's not going to come close to the original. And kind of like when they remade the Korean film Old Boy. I mean, there is a remake of it, but it doesn't touch the original.
Right.
Yeah.
Just don't remake The Matrix for anyone listening in the future and the rights are available. Just don't. Make your own original film. It's
It was good
perfect
enough
as
the
it is.
first time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for spending the vast majority of your evening chatting with us. This has been absolutely fascinating, and I want to do it again for Roland Rogers, which is why I've deliberately, I don't know, we're not going to ask any questions about Roland Rogers now. Let's read it, and then let's do this again.
Yeah, all I could say is it's a ghost love story, but even more non-traditional than the ghost qualifier would suggest. But you'll see soon enough. And this has been a delight. It's been lovely to chat with both of you.
Well, thank you very much. The feeling is definitely mutual. And I mean, I wonder, where can our listeners and viewers connect with you?
You can find me on social media. I suppose when we get more into a cycle for Roland where the cover is officially unveiled, there's something like that, I'll go public on Instagram again, and you can find me there. For now, just find Patricia Wants to Cuddle in a bookstore and read it. That's so much more important than finding me. I put all the coolest, funniest, most interesting, violent thoughts that I have in this green thing you can hold in your hands. What am I going to do? Show you a picture of the sandwich I'm eating for lunch? That's no good.
I mean, it was either that or a rant about women's bathrooms.
Yes. Yeah. Follow me for rants about public restroom hygiene, which is atrocious. I do feel like it's also getting worse to just exist in public space, but that's a whole other tangent.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, do you have any final thoughts to leave our listeners with?
Write fearlessly. I'm going to steal that. Fearless writing. Do fearless writing. Throw out genre rule books and surprise yourself.